Conducting in-depth qualitative interviews with specific stakeholders or persons that represent specific groups can be a really, really great way of getting rich, detailed insights into a specific phenomena. And it's a way of getting insights that you cannot capture with quantitative data. That's the whole point of qualitative interviews, is that you're really drilling it down into someone's experience that is unique to them and that gives you some critical insights about a broader issue, broader phenomena, some theoretical relationships and assumptions that you have as part of your background knowledge and understanding the research literature. So interviews can really help give you examples and kind of confirmation of things that you already know from the previous research, from the literature. And it can also help you kind of expand upon different aspects of the research literature that maybe hasn't been investigated before or hasn't been investigated in a very in-depth way. So interviews can be a great source of data, can be a great research tool to get you some really unique information. Now, there's a couple of mechanisms around doing qualitative, in-depth qualitative interviews that I think is really important to understand before you go into those interviews. And number one is just a basic thing, is recruitment. It feels so logistical and so kind of practically minded, but it's one of the critical aspects of your research. Recruiting interview participants can make or break what area you're investigating, what phenomena you're investigating, because there are participant groups that are completely out of your reach. You may want to do research on the last 10 presidents in the United States, or last 5 presidents of the United States, last 3 presidents of the United States, and you may not be able to get interviews with each one of those presidents. It just may not be possible. You may not have access to them. Or it may be some other high-level official that is really difficult to get access to. Or it may be a stakeholder group that's on the ground, that's living every day of their life, but they're so remote and they're so removed from you that you have no way of getting in contact with them. And more importantly, you have no way of creating enough trust and rapport to actually make a connection with that group so that they will be willing to be interviewed by you. So recruitment, really important part of the interview process, and it's a really important thing to approach methodologically and in understanding how you are going to actually reach out to those groups, create rapport, create trust, and then get them to attend an interview. Everything else seems like it's scheduling, but my goodness, I can't tell you how many times I thought, recruitment's going to take me a month, a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, and it ended up taking 3 times as long because it's a matter of continuing to reach out, follow up, reach out, follow up, reach out, follow up. I've had really good luck if you're doing interviews with stakeholder groups that are kind of professionals, or especially younger professionals. I've had really great luck recruiting on LinkedIn. You can kind of connect with people who are connected to you and to others in your field, and it's not too hard to just send them a direct message and say, hey, I'm doing this research. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to be a participant in my research. It can be a great way of reaching out to people. The other thing that you should really think about when it comes to recruitment and just doing interviews in general is just be respectful of people's time. You cannot demand that they do an interview. It's their option. It's their choice. They are volunteering for this. So make sure that you're approaching them with respect, with kindness, with compassion, and understanding that interviewing for your research may not be their top priority, and it may not matter to them at all unless you're doing something that's so action research that's actually going to affect and improve that person's life. Chances are they're going to look at you and just as an academic that's doing research that may not actually impact what they're doing or how they're living. Another really important thing to talk about at this juncture is informed consent. You need to make sure that you are abiding by whatever national laws, institutional rules that deal with privacy, consent, and participants' data and information. Check in with your institution, check in with your national body concerning research, privacy, and ethics. Make sure that you're adhering to all those laws, rules, regulations, because they are critically important, not just for you as a researcher to protect you and your your work, but also for protecting the participants who are going to be giving you their experience and their knowledge. Generally speaking, with in-depth qualitative research, at least in my experience, that you're not going to necessarily drill into really challenging issues of that person's life. You're really going to be talking about more general topical issues that are related to a phenomena of interest. Now, you can do in-depth qualitative research about someone's trauma or their very personal experiences or their identity that can be really provoking and triggering for them. And in that case, you're dealing with a whole new set of ethical issues and rules that you need to be aware of going into those interviews. And if you're doing research, interview research with disadvantaged groups or disenfranchised groups of people, you have to adhere to an even higher, stricter code of ethics, because those groups of people are easily taken advantage of, and there's a whole history around researchers taking advantage of and doing terrible things to disadvantaged groups of people. And so as a researcher, you have an ethical and social responsibility to make sure that your research is not taking advantage of other people, especially those participants. So that being said, say you've gone ahead, got a group of people, you've requested time for them to go interview with you. They've agreed to it. Consent is all informed and everything like that. They've signed on the dotted line. They're happy. They understand the research. They're very into it. And you're sitting down. You're trying to make a place for you to meet. Find a place that's comfortable for them. You're going to end up with a lot better responses from them if they're comfortable where they're at. If you invite them to a very public place and you're asking them maybe about their personal experiences, that could be really provoking to them. So they may say, well, if I'm going to talk about this subject, I'd rather do it in my home. I'd rather do it in the home of a friend. I'd rather do it anywhere else. Of course, you should take into consideration safety issues at all times, because it may not be comfortable for you as an investigator to meet at somebody's home. But if it seems that the situation is safe enough to meet at that person's home, do it at that person's home so that they feel comfortable kind of revealing to you more personal information about their experience, if that's what you're kind of investigating, if that's what you're interested in. Again, don't forget about consent. When you get down to the interview, make sure that you're getting in writing or orally their consent to be interviewed for your research. If you're recording the interview, and I do recommend that people record the interviews, and of course that brings in a whole separate set of rules and regulations concerning their privacy, because now you have a digital copy of what they said. Make sure that you double record. So bring 2 recorders. Have a fail-safe. I cannot tell you the number of times that I thought I had both recorders recording, and one of them ran out of batteries, one of them stopped for some reason just randomly in the middle of the interview, but I had that other recorder, so I had another copy. Make sure you use 2 recorders. It's just a fail-safe. It's just a safety measure. Make sure periodically through the interview that you're checking in with them, especially if you're asking them about really difficult issues, especially personal difficult issues. You shouldn't let an hour go by without saying, hey, how are you feeling? Would you like to continue with this interview? Do you need a break? 15 minutes can be long enough to say, hey, do you want a break? Or would you like to keep going? Try to read the person's body language. Try to read how they're responding to the questions, and see periodically whether or not they need just to step away and then come back to the interview at a later time. They may even have only agreed to a 30-minute interview, in which case you might end up with a lot of content in that 30-minute interview and then need to re-interview them. So just ask them, hey, is it okay if I come back, or if we schedule another interview as a follow-up? So check in with them periodically throughout the interview. Make sure they're still on board, in, and happy to continue the lines of questioning. Sometimes, even in my research, and I've done research on very high-level kind of political policy issues, they get into a topic that has a lot of personal meaning to them that can make them feel very strong emotions. And that can happen in almost any in-depth interview, especially if it's a topic that somebody cares about. The best kind of way of approaching this is just with basic empathy. So understanding that they're going through an emotional experience right then, and that they may need 5 minutes to go to the restroom and compose themselves or calm down a little bit before they re-enter the interview. They may need to stop the interview entirely. So just check in with them again. Say, hey, look, I understand this is difficult. Do you need a few minutes to take a break? Or would you like to stop the interview now and we can reschedule? Or would you like to just end the interview now? Give them that choice, give them that option, but give them that trigger so that they're able to respond to that. Don't just assume that they're going to compose themselves and then get ready for the next question. Really give them an opt-out so they can just say, nope, I don't want to continue this line of questioning. If you end up going long, as often happens with semi-structured interviews, because you really get in depth with specific issues, be respectful of that person's time. Ask their consent to continue doing the interview. If you see yourself and you're like 15 minutes before the interview is supposed to end, or maybe it's 5 or 10 minutes before the interview is supposed to end, and you know that, you have a few more questions and you just need another 30 minutes or you need another 15 minutes after you're supposed to end, just ask them. Just say, hey, look, I have a few more questions I want to ask, but I see that our time is almost up. Are you okay if we go 15 minutes longer, 5 minutes longer, 10 minutes longer than we expected? And give them that choice, right? So then they can say, yeah, absolutely, no problem. Or no, I'm sorry, I have another meeting or I have somewhere else I have to be and I'm not able to do that. Last kind of point of advice here is to take field notes during the interview. Now, I know it can be hard to sit there and listen to what they're saying, think about the question that you're asking them or you're going to ask them, and write notes at the same time. But those field notes can be incredibly valuable to you after the interview, because they kind of record your first impressions and some of your ways of thinking about what they're saying to you while they're saying it. So that can be a really important source of data. Now, what I do whenever I'm going to be going into an interview is I'll actually come a few minutes early to the interview, and I will note kind of my observations of the environment. I will look around, describe the setting that I'm in, describe where I'm at, what's going on. Is it noisy? Is it quiet? What sort of cafe is it if we're meeting at a cafe? What sort of neighborhood is it if I'm meeting at their house? Really try to note down as many observational things that come into your perspective as you can, so that again, you have another source of data, another source of information when you go back to analyze those interviews. And then after that interview, I think it's really important to take 5 or 10 minutes and just reflect on it. Make some more notes. Maybe take your interview guide out if you have it printed out as a piece of paper, and make some notes on the interview guide itself. Maybe make notes on a separate piece of paper, but just kind of get your initial reaction, get your reflection on the interview so that you have that recorded. You may imagine that you'll remember it. They said something really, really cool and really important. It really profoundly affected me during that interview. I couldn't possibly forget it. Well, after you've done 3 or 4 more interviews, chances are you'll look back on that interview and be like, what did they say? If you're recording it then as part of your notes, then it can be a really, really great resource. Now, I always do my notes written by hand. It's just because I don't like sitting on a computer in front of someone asking them questions and then clickety, 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 clickety. I just think it interrupts that kind of relationship. So I always take notes by hand, and I even have usually my interview guide printed out as well, and I often use that as as where I take my notes. And so if I do it like that, then what I'll do is I'll have question 1, and then I'll do a nice big white space before I have question 2. So there's a bit of space that I can then write my notes or write the kind of ideas that come up whenever they're responding to that question. I do it like that rather than having question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right on top of each other and then having to take notes in the bottom of the page or something like that. So you're doing an interview, really important that you get this in-depth qualitative information from an individual. Don't forget, recruitment takes a long time. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be annoyingly practical. It's going to be annoyingly administrative, but you'll get through it. And when you get the data that you need, it's going to be really, really worthwhile. Respect the person's time. Make sure you're respecting them as individuals, and always, 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 always abide by your institute's and your country's rules when it comes to research ethics and getting consent, especially. Whenever you're doing the research, meet somewhere that's comfortable for them. Make sure that you're kind of reading what their feeling is on the situation and they're aware of the kind of topics that you want to talk about, so that they can say, I'd rather rather meet here, there, or somewhere else. Always be safe. Safety number one. Don't forget about your asking them for their consent and getting that on record. Double record the interview. Have 2 recording devices set up, of course, if they're consenting to be recorded. Check in with them regularly to make sure they're still okay and they're still feeling all right with continuing to interview. If they get emotional, give them a break. Just say, hey, look, let's take 5 minutes. Let's take a step away. We can talk about this after a short break, or give them the option to just end the interview right there. If you go long on the interview, make sure that you're also giving them the option to say, hey, I can't stay any later than we had planned, or yeah, I'll give you 5 or 10 extra minutes. Take some sort of field note before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. This way, when you actually get that interview done, you will have the richest and best, most in-depth qualitative data that you could possibly imagine.